speaker today began organizing around housing with Homes for All, St. Louis in 2019. Their work focuses on the research, passage, implementation, and evaluation of legislation and policies that forward renter-worker protections. She assisted in crafting the 4 and More for STL Renters campaign to introduce a right to counsel, tenant bill of rights, an Office of Tenant Advocacy, and a citywide tenant union of the St. Louis Board of Alders. She's also a public researcher, historian, and analyst focusing on the work, lives, and organizing advocacy writings of radical queer Black women in the Midwest from the 1970s. Please join me in welcoming to our stage Shuron Jones.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with y'all this morning. And I really appreciate the mindfulness reset because I needed that this morning. But yes. So if y'all don't mind, I would love to talk to you all about the legacy of housing injustice in St. Louis, but more importantly, the legacy of organizing and work and action toward ensuring that the most marginalized folks in St. Louis have housing that is affordable and comfortable and dignified and that all of us will want to live in. And so, and your program is titled something a little different, but I like to play around with titles, so bear with me if y'all don't mind. So as I just stated, the first thing we want to do is contend with and confront the legacies of housing injustice, and then talk about some of the work that we're doing now to ensure housing justice. Do you mind going to the next slide, please? Cool. So if y'all don't mind, whenever I do these kind of things, I like to start off with acknowledgments. I think it's important to ground us in who we are, where we've come from, and then to push us toward where we're going. So if y'all don't mind, the first acknowledgement, of course, is to the land that we sit on. I wish to acknowledge the folks that came before us. Of course, we're not sitting on land that most of us came from, unfortunately, however you want to see it. But I also want to acknowledge the indigenous peoples who lived here, whose experience and lives were traumatically and changed through colonization. I also want to acknowledge the folks who kind of worked the land for free, and folks who labored without pay. Also, I want to acknowledge some of our the four people that came before us in the housing justice struggle, and we'll talk about at least one of those people as we progress. And also, I want to acknowledge us. Like you probably said, who is this person named Shuron, and who is she, and why is she talking about housing justice? So I appreciate y'all bearing with me, listening to me. So I want to acknowledge us as well. So thank you. May we have the next slide, please? Cool. So the other thing I want to start off with is the biography of a organizer. These are the things that it took for me to start organizing. And I'm not sure if folks in the audience, if y'all have experienced some of these same things. So in 2016, I was a lowly graduate student looking for housing, and I was living with an organizing mentor. That fell apart, as some relationships do. And I, of course, made no money as a graduate student because graduate students are forced to not make money, but that's another subject. But a low-income person of color desperate for housing, and a person who is femme-presenting, so doesn't look so statistically, folks who are more femme-presenting are more likely to be taken advantage of by slumlords and landlords and speculators and folks who do housing work, who are involved in housing. And again, I was leaving one bad situation and trying to get into something better. And because of that desperation, I took what I can find. The first apartment I saw, the conditions were abysmal, but I listened to the landlord. When the landlord said, "Oh, we'll fix it. Oh, we'll get to it. No problem, we got you." And being the gullible person that I am, I believed them. And so I moved into this apartment, and like I said, I won't get into the nasty details, but let's just say I was not living well in dignity. And unfortunately, I was also, the landlord also tried to intimidate me whenever I would ask about making improvements to the apartment, especially because I was paying a lot of money. And so all these things culminated to push me into doing organizing work, because I did not know how to navigate, how to advocate for myself, but I knew one thing: if you don't pay rent, they will fix things. That's what I thought. That was the opposite of what happened. I told them, "Look, I just wanted my apartment fixed. You can have your rent when you do that." And of course, they evicted me. The eviction is still on my record, but it's wrong in CaseNet. It said I didn't show up to court, and I did. So that's another issue we can talk about. But suffice it to say, these are the culminating factors that made me to an organizer, and also that led me down the path of researching how folks approach housing justice in the past. So can we have the next slide, please? Cool. So first things first, because like I said, I'm a historian, I have to lay down context. So there have been restraints and opportunities when it comes to housing justice work, and when it comes to housing, before, during, and after this famous case in 1948 called Shelley versus Kraemer, that said you kind of can't have racially restrictive covenants. Like, that's not cool. You kind of can't segregate people. That's, we kind of say that in our laws, that segregation not cool. But so for restraints, the things that kept housing justice from occurring here, one of those big things is the colonial legacy and segregation. Like, as you can see from the pictures, like in St. Louis, folks not playing about keeping certain areas in certain ways. But there was also opportunities here in this city, in this land. And some of those opportunities include the convergence of like education and advocacy and organization by Black-led organizations, a lot of which were led by Black femme-presenting people. And so, just briefly, so people from France, people from England started migrating to the area of St. Louis and settling it. But depending on who you were and where you came from, you had to settle certain places. And so racially restrictive covenants weren't just for African Americans, they were for like white ethnic folks too. So for instance, if you were German, you would settle in Jeff Vanderloo. If you were Jewish, you would settle on the west side. But Black folks who were migrating from the South right before and during Shelley versus Kraemer in 1948. And these folks, and folks who migrated settled on North St. Louis because of racially restrictive covenants. But in those areas, they were able to, like I said in the opportunity section, build up institutions that would fight for housing justice. And St. Louis was the first in a lot of things, and a lot of them aren't good, unfortunately. Like 1820, the Missouri Compromise. Oh yeah, you can have slavery in Missouri, cool. Or, the Dred Scott case, or we can go on and on. And 1917 was an example of St. Louis being the first in something not so cool, when it was one of the first place cities to put racially restrictive covenants on a ballot. It's the difference between the government saying, and the people saying, But you know, that's okay. We're recovering. We're getting to housing justice. We just need to lay the foundation. May I have the next slide, please? Perfect. So again, remember that date, 1948, Shelley versus Kraemer. I'm gonna quiz y'all later. No, I'm kidding. But so we have these culminating factors. Chuck, you said that your folks got a GI Bill and were able to go to go to college to be an engineer. Excuse me. So by the 20s and after World War II, more and more folks were able to capture some of the assistance or some of the programs that the government was putting out, with one of which is being the GI Bill. But before that, especially the federal government would give like white and ethnic white folks loans to move to the suburbs, and at the same time, real estate agents would say, those people are moving in, get out. So it was a culmination of factors. But as ethnic white and white folks moved out into the suburbs, black people took their place and other folks of color, but that doesn't mean that the housing stock was good housing stock. A lot of the housing stock was dilapidated and needed a lot of repair. And then of course, two families were turned into four families were turned into 8 families. It was a lot going on. And on top of that, one of my favorite eras to study is good old urban renewal. So a lot of city officials and government officials, policymakers thought, if we tear down the so-called slums and the ghettos, everything will be good. Folks would be okay. They didn't worry about displacement. They didn't worry about community. They didn't worry about any of that. They just said, tear it down. And so I've been talking a lot, but these are some of the things that are gonna lead us to housing justice. May I have the next slide, please? So, first of all, check out how fly they are. Like, I wish I would go to downtown or City Hall looking this good, but I don't. So, I wanna introduce you to this person right here on the right. So remember when I said we'll start talking about people? And I usually use notes, but I feel like we're starting to get to know each other, we're cool. So I'll it's not extemporaneous, but the slides are helping is what I'm saying. So forgive me if I miss something. I'll send you my notes if you want. But that person to the right name is Jean King. Jean King is originally from Arkansas and moved to St. Louis, like a lot of black folks, to find a job, find someplace decent to live, and kind of get out of Jim Crow, because St. Louis was bad, but Arkansas was definitely worse. And so Jean King lived in a housing project adjacent to another housing project. And one day she was walking down the street in the winter and she saw a kid eating food off the ground. And she thought to herself, why is it that our housing projects are perpetuating poverty? Why is it that we have to some people, beautiful apartment complexes when folks don't even have food to eat? And so one of the things that she was trying to do is intersect issues. So to Jean King, housing, food, and all kinds of issues converged together. And so when she saw that kid eating food off the sidewalk, she thought to herself, okay, there'll be an opportunity for me to organize and it'll come up. So at the same time that was happening, this group of fantastic low-income women of color started organizing because, again, they saw the convergence, they saw the intersection of different issues. They wanted good jobs. They wanted decent paying jobs, and they wanted dignity in housing. And they wanted food. And there was this thing going around that we have a word for now called environmental racism, but back in the day it was like, oh, my area is covered with smog. Why can't I breathe? Maybe I should be able to breathe as well as eat, as well as have a decent house. And so these women started putting these ideas together as Gene King is thinking about this child eating off the street. And so some of the things that they would do would, for instance, they would go sit at City Hall and demand that the mayor or the alders come out and talk to them. They would go to the St. Louis Housing Authority office with signs that said things like $1 an hour just not gonna help, gonna cut it. We need more money. Or my kid is starving. We need more food. And so for 2 years, I know that sounds like a short amount of time to some of y'all that's like 2 years, dang, that's a long time. But either way you see it, these ladies had to fight for 2 years, getting arrested, having summons against them, until they and Gene King met. Because sometimes, without sounding foo-foo, the stars sometimes align. In a scientific way, right, Chuck? Yes. But sometimes the stars align and folks meet each other. And so one day Gene King was walking down the street. She liked to walk, apparently. And there was this meeting of these ladies going on. And the ladies said, okay, this is what we're gonna do. We have a strategy, we have a plan. Then they meet her and they're like, hey, Gene, would you like to be the president of our organization? And of course she's like, sure, I've been waiting on y'all been waiting on me, let's do this. And so that culminated in the 1968 to 1969 rent strike. It was one of the biggest and one of the first rent strikes in US history. And they got what they wanted. It took 8 months. So okay, it took 2 years and 8 months. But it took 8 months, and finally they were able to get some of the demands they were asking for. And y'all would think they were asking for like millions and millions of dollars in redevelopment, or they were asking for co-ops or community benefit agreements. No, they're like, give us a couple more dollars an hour, give us more assistance, give us food, and give us a voice. Like, if you have a committee or if you have a board, put one of us on there, simple things. Or one of my favorite things, like if you're low income and you have Section 8, they used to base Section 8 on how big your apartment is. Now they base it on a whole different formula because of these folks. So may I have the next slide, please? And I'm almost finished, I promise. So that picture, ignore the people. No, I'm kidding. Don't ignore the people in it. Just ignore me. So this picture was taken last year. You can tell because we are bundled up. But we at Homes for All St. Louis and our comrades at different organizations, we stand on the shoulders of giants. We are a part of the legacy of Gene King and folks who fought for housing justice work. And we take that legacy seriously. And so we try our best to educate folks about folks like Gene King, and we try our best to educate folks like you about what's going on right now. So that is a picture of us testifying at the Right to Counsel hearing in St. Louis City last year. So if you don't know, and it's okay if you don't know, I didn't know, but Right to Counsel means let's say, Gina, you're getting evicted, no fault of your own, or you're just getting evicted. You get a lawyer, she get evicted. Now, you would think that we would be represented if we get evicted anyway, because it's a case. But no, in St. Louis City, you can go to eviction court. Well, we don't have eviction court. You can go in front of a judge for an eviction case and not be represented. That's what happened to me. Like, I thought that default meant, oh, it's over. When in actuality, default means you may not be able to find an apartment for a long time. And that's okay, because some people have even worse than I do, so I'm not complaining. But anyway, so what are some of, we're also, other housing justice issues that we're fighting for, again, are those intersections. Like, for instance, landlords shouldn't retaliate against you if you make conditions issues complaints. It's that simple. Or if you are a parent, your children should have certain benefits, like not living in an apartment with mold, or not living in an apartment with lead. Or even if you aren't a parent, you shouldn't live in an apartment with lead or mold or pests. So those are kind of some of the things that we're fighting for, intersectional issues. So, fortunately and unfortunately, we're still suffering as renters. There are still so many evictions happening. And evictions, most folks think you get evicted because you can't pay your rent. Well, how do you pay your rent if wages haven't gone up? And if the state is still fighting us for $10 an hour? That's another subject. But St. Louis is one of they call it a shrinking city because population has shrank so much. But on top of that, again, assistance is gone, the rental moratorium is gone, so we're having to catch up, a lot of us. But that's not a bad thing because we're still demanding housing justice. We're still demanding and making sure that institutions, especially state institutions, provide for renters. So I'm gonna end on a good note because we're celebrating. So yes, Friday. Okay, so in that picture, we lost, unfortunately. We didn't get funding for Right to Counsel last year, and we had a couple alders. If you want to see some comedy, please look up the testimony from Right to Counsel last year. Some of those alders should be on stage. They are so funny. Like one of the alders said, "Oh, tenants are renters. If they don't pay their rent, that's because they're buying Jordans." Scout's honor, that's what they said. It is comedy gold, but that's okay. So we lost that time, but guess what? Friday, Board Bill 59 for Right to Counsel passed through the Board of Alders and was funded. So that's yes. So that's the other lesson we learned standing on the shoulder of the giants. Remember I said it took them 2 years and 8 months just to be able to sit on a board for the Housing Authority. It took us 2 years plus to get Right to Counsel on people's radar, let alone to get it passed. So I leave you with this. St. Louis has had I'll say the word ambivalent legacy toward housing justice. The conditions were set, especially with colonization and segregation, to ensure that housing justice doesn't happen. But the women like Jean King and women like Bertha Gilkey and other folks that we don't know their names have been fighting to make sure before us that we get housing justice, and that now we are still fighting for it. May I have the last slide, please? So you're asking me, okay, I heard you talk, you've been talking a long time, how do I get involved? So, remember when I told you we were on Right to Counsel? That's just one part of what we're trying to do. We also want a Tenant Bill of Rights, and the Tenant Bill of Rights is basically a set of laws that landlords have to adhere to make sure that renters aren't displaced, harassed, and that they have dignified housing, point blank period. And we want to do it through an Office of Tenant Advocacy, which is like a clearinghouse for information, and we also want a citywide tenant union. So if any of those things interest you, or if you're like, Shuron, that Shelley versus Kraemer case, I want more information. Or that rent strike, that was interesting. I would like more information. I did not put my email address on there, but I do have cards with my email address, and I would be more than happy to share them. You can tell that I'm not the most technologically advanced person, but that's okay. We're stepping out of our comfort zone. But anyway, you can visit either one of those websites or either one of those pages for more information. And like I said, just to leave you all again, the fight may seem hard and long and tenuous and stressful, and it is. But at the other side, we have wins, we have victories, and we are all fighting together to make sure that everybody in St. Louis, no matter what color, no matter what income, no matter what immigration status, no matter if they're in the LGBTQIA community, have a disability, whatever, Whatever or whoever you are, you deserve safe, dignified, affordable housing. So thank y'all so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Shuron. Lots of good words of wisdom. I believe we missed the core values, but since we don't have Seek here, and we started late, I'm going to skip over those. The ushers will now take up a collection. If you're moved to make a donation today, we appreciate anything you may be able to offer. We, like all nonprofit organizations, rely on the generosity of our members and friends to ensure our community can keep providing our many free programs. If you don't have cash with you today and you feel inclined, you can donate at ethicalstl.org/donate or use the QR code on the screen now. If you're interested in becoming a member of the Ethical Society, our new Membership Plus program manager is Courtney Scott Camerata. She's here today, right up in front here, and can answer your questions about membership or programming, and also her email's on the back of your programs. Meanwhile, we would love to keep you informed about future events at the Ethical Society. If you'd like to join our weekly newsletter, use the QR code above me to sign up. You can also sign up at our website. Announcements for most things that happen at the Society come through email. One announcement, please stick around for a few minutes after platform today to learn the chorus to Crowded Table, a musical selection in next week's platform. Any interested audience members are invited to sing along from your seats during the platform next week. I have another announcement, and then we'll have Amy come up. Please come to our artist reception today at 12:30. Our quilt artist, Ann Titus, will talk about her work, and we will have coffee and cookies in the foyer. If you enjoyed today's music, please come back tomorrow at 6 p.m. to hear more from Kirk Carter. It's a free concert here in the auditorium as part of our Monday music series. Amy?
We had a little printer issue earlier, so there's some confusion. Those were actually the announcements I was going to make. But I will reiterate, please stick around after platform today to learn the song with me and Claire. We're really excited to hopefully have some of you sing along next week. So even if you're not a singer, even if you are self-conscious about singing, even if you've never sung before in your life, please stick around after platform and learn the chorus to the song Crowded Table. It's really lovely, and we would love to have everyone singing along that wants to next Sunday. Get excited. And then I also wanted to remind you that Kurt will be here tomorrow from 6 to 7 doing a little extra concert for you guys. Please show up for that. It's a free concert. He'll be accepting a love offering. And then the other thing is next Sunday, in addition to singing, some of you have mentioned that you would like to see us with new and improved marketing materials and pamphlets and informational stuff. So next week we will be taking photographs. And so anyone who is willing to be photographed for potential use in marketing materials, please stick around afterwards. I think we'll be taking some pictures during platform, but we will need actual models to look excited and happy to be here. So get your smiles ready for next week, but we would really love to have as many people in our community in these marketing materials so we could accurately represent our community and hopefully invite new people. Thank you.
We will now have our final musical selection from Kurt, Built by Friends.